This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Sections, giving rise to the term intertestamental books. The Clementine Vulgate, a revised version of the Vulgate published by Pope Clement VIII. 3 books not included in the Council of Trent canon were returned, including Prayer of Manasses and 3rd and 4th Esdras. The King James Version followed formats of both the Luther Bible and the Geneva Bible of 1560, including the books of the Clementine Vulgate which did not exist in the Luther Bible. The books are listed in a section named Books Called Apocrypha. The British Puritans excluded apocryphal writings and returned to Martin Luther's ultimate standard sola scriptura, meaning Scripture alone, and excluded the Apocrypha completely. The American Bible Society removed restrictions on publishing the Apocrypha in Bibles beginning in 1964, followed by the British and Foreign Bible Society in 1966. The Greek Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox churches integrate the Septuagint in the Old Testament. And the Anglican Communion includes lectionary readings, lessons from the Apocrypha in the Book of Common Prayer, but only for instruction in manners and life, not for establishing doctrine. Many early Christian teachers, such as Ambrose, Augustine, Athanasius, Hippolytus, Cyril of Jerusalem, and Patrick, were said to have taught from the Apocrypha, though just as many were said to have not cited it. Some believe that it was inspired, but less so than the other books of the Old Testament. Great theologians such as John Wycliffe, John Calvin, Cardinal Cajetan, Ulrich Zwingli, and Martin Luther based the value of the Apocrypha on its ability or lack of ability to, as Martin Luther wrote, quote, show to thee Christ, close quote. Volumes have been written about the Apocrypha and whether or not it should be considered inspired Scripture. Historical evidence is contradictory, and this is one more reason why modern Christians should study it today. The most significant exclusion of the Apocrypha probably occurred as a result of the American Revolution. It had been against the law to print a Bible in English, because the King James Bible was protected by copyright laws. Once the United States became its own country, printers in America began to print Bibles which did not include the Apocrypha because the Bibles were less expensive to print without it. Some Christian groups assumed that it was not in the Bibles because it was not part of the canon of Scripture. And when it was added later, skepticism accompanied its inclusion. Henri Blocher, in his 2003 inaugural address as theology professor at Wheaton College Graduate School of Biblical and Theological Studies, noted that the study of the Old Testament Apocrypha is significant because, quote, naive questions that penetrate deeply ask if Catholic Bibles add to Scripture or if Protestant Bibles subtract from it, close quote. He also notes that St. John, in Revelation 22:18, writes about God's warning to anyone who attaches or takes away from the words of the book. The solemn writing was an appeal to protect what Blocher names, quote, sacred substance, close quote. Ultimately, it is only through reading what the Apocrypha contains that informed decisions might be made. More information may be found by logging on to biblicalstudies.org.uk/pdf/apocrypha_Blocher.pdf. In modern times, the Apocrypha has only been excluded from the Old Testament in some Protestant publications. The idea that these books are forbidden is viewed both as myth and fact by many Christian scholars, with the reasonable course left in the midst of divided opinion being to study and understand these books for oneself. The New Testament is said to contain many references to the books of the Apocrypha, and Christians today would do well to be knowledgeable about them. Jesus himself is said to reference texts from the Apocrypha, using the Old Testament language which was familiar to those he was teaching. There are many comparisons which can be made between specific New Testament texts and related Apocrypha texts. It is also interesting to note that the Apostolic Fathers of the early Church referenced the Apocrypha and quoted from it as they did the Old Testament. It was hard not to do so, as the Jewish Old Testament included the Apocrypha. Much debate continues over which books should be considered part of Holy Scripture.